So we have another fantastic panel with us here for this session. First, we will hear from Magdalena Zadara, who is Head of Product at Digital Service in Germany. Then we will hear from John Pilon, who is Director of the Canadian Federal Government at Accele, one of our private sector knowledge partners today. And then we will hear from Michael Goit, who is Director, Digital Credentials, Policy and Agreements Office of the Chief Information Officer at the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat here in Ottawa. So we can get into those questions straight away, I'm going to go over to you, Magdalena.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Siobhan. Let me just say one sentence about why I'm standing up and not sitting down like everyone else. I have a bad back, so thank you so much for accommodating for that. I'm sure some of you might empathize with the issue. So I'm going to give you a little bit of German context to digital ID. So we do happen to have a citizen ID. We've had it for a long time. We have ID cards that cover pretty much all permanent residents and citizens in Germany. And yet the adoption of digital identity in Germany is at single-digit percentage numbers. So we have not seen that kind of dichotomy of if you have a citizen ID, then you'll do well in digital ID. And I think some context that you also need to understand about Germany is that obviously we come with a very rich and burdensome history around authoritarian regimes, around the state essentially abusing people's data or abusing their personal details to prosecute them, to discriminate against them, etc. So there's a very high level of built-in distrust in this society. And I think to summarize the 3 points that I'm going to touch upon in terms of building trust is just it takes time. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So first of all, the technology that you're using behind your digital ID needs to be solid. And I think Germany is quite high on the kind of sensitivity scale to this abuse, as I mentioned, but I'm sure there's lessons from this that can be taken away to other governments or other states. So the tech really needs to be solid, and we do have a very, very active kind of third sector, non-government actors who are very kind of watchful and critical of the government. So if you put out a new tech product in Germany, people will attempt to hack it immediately and kind of see how it can be abused. So knowing that it just takes time for technology to be proven, to be secure, private, etc. So we do have actually this EID infrastructure, as we call it. We've had it around for over 10 years, and that has been tried and tested and hacked in any possible direction, and it now stands up. So why is it not adopted if it's so great? Well, the second point is whatever you're making, it needs to be usable and useful to people, right? So just because you have something that's a very solid piece of technology, it doesn't mean that automatically people are going to use it. And that actually just really also takes time and patience and some diverse profiles, right, to work on these things. So we at Digital Service, we're a quite new unit in Germany. And our whole spiel, if you want, is that we have very interdisciplinary teams. Many of us come from the private sector, from the software industry. And so kind of diversity in profiles and interdisciplinarity is something that we put a very big emphasis on. And having these profiles, you can then start working with users, user testing your solutions, and really getting into the details. Because there's no like single sweeping decision that you can, as a policymaker or as an actor in government, you can take and then everything is going to fall into place perfectly. There's thousands of decisions every single day, and people need to take them every single day with this trust building in mind. And I guess the third point that follows out of that is just having a shift of mindset from being a normative body to being user-centric, right? So the government, governments around the world, but especially the German government, comes from a perspective of just being a normative body. They put out laws, people have to adhere by them, end of story. And in a time when you know, before the information age, maybe that worked fine, or even German government was held up as an example of great public administration, but nowadays it just doesn't work anymore because people get their information from everywhere and they expect very different things. So users are expecting their government to make their lives easier and not harder. And so you need to shift to a user-centric mindset and really kind of have the courage also to face citizens and face users. And it's because it's not a pleasant process, as many of you who've done user testing might know. If you go out with the first version, people might hate it and they might criticize it, and you might feel a bit bad. But once you get into routine of improving and iterating, it'll feel great that people are starting to accept it. So kind of these three things help you, I guess, just be patient and build up a muscle of working with your users to build trust. And unfortunately, there's no silver bullet on how to build trust in digital identity or anywhere for that matter.
Thank you so much, Magdalena. I mean, a perfect way to start, because I think you've raised lots of issues that everyone else will be familiar with. So interesting to hear what you said, that despite having that national ID scheme in place, you got very low take-up. The importance not just of the technology being robust and being correct, but also those issues around culture and history and trust in your kind of public services, trust in your political system as well. And then that shift to a user-centric mindset being really important. Thank you so much, Magdalena. John, coming to you.
Well, it's a lot to digest. Well, I wasn't really sure, to be honest, and then we talked about that last week on where does industry fit in this discussion. And you brought up a lot of very good points around user-centric and trust, but how do you build up trust in essentially, from an industry perspective, a zero trust environment? Like, we don't trust anybody. So how do you, and I think it's going to be generational as well. So, from my generation to my son's generation, it's totally different. The level of acceptance of government or technology, right? So my son does things at 12, I don't know how he does it. So, but he's very well versed in what he does, and he's very good at it. You mentioned there's no silver bullet, and that's a big one. And coming from industry and from the cyber side, it is a team sport, right? And you gotta try and get this right, and it's never going to be perfect. But I think that the key thing is, like I said, generational, but I think it has to be seamless to the user, right? Anything that you have a pushback on, think about your daily lives, new technologies, new systems coming in. For me, I got another Salesforce module to fill out. I'm like, oh, yeah, it takes a while, but you kind of get used to it, and it becomes, it's normalized. So I think to your point, it will take time to get normalized, but I think one, digital identity is important. I mean, if anyone's really worried in today's age about your information being out there, like, have you bought a car? Have you gone to the dentist? Have you, all your information, you bought a house, it's all there, right? And I think the key thing is not being able to string all that information together in any specific time to identify a specific person, right? So I think of insurance companies. When you have an insurance claim, I had one 2 weeks ago. They call them, well, we just got to verify that it's you. Okay, well, what's the questions, right? So I think it's being able to enable organizations and governments to be able to identify an individual using a digital ID, but only the right people with the right amount of information is key. You only need as much information just to validate if it's you or you. You don't have to have. You brought up a great point about renting an Airbnb. Like, we need a copy of your driver's license, a picture. Do you really need that picture? So I think we have to have some baselines, and I think industry, working along with governments and other organizations, it's going to take time, to your point, but it is going there, right? So it's the technology, like I said, it has to be seamless. It has to be, I hate to say disruptive, but we need disruptive technology, right? So the days of, we always say castle and moat, or regular networking and all your security, it doesn't scale, and it breaks all the time. So how do governments work with industry to move forward? And policy and compliance is a huge hurdle, right? I've been dealing with it for way longer than I want to admit. So you always seem to get to a certain point, and then things change, right? So how do you get ahead of that change? And I think that's a big thing for collaboration between both sides of the fence. I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Thanks, John. So interesting what you said about your son, because I think this point has been raised before, that people's expectations of what they want government to deliver are ever increasing when it comes to digitalization, but their trust in government to be able to do that is declining at the same time. So there is this real challenge there, I think. The importance of making anything that we do seamless for the user. And also, I don't know what the audience think, we can maybe touch on that. You said something about it's coming, it's inevitable. Are digital IDs inevitable? Are we already on that track that we can't stop?
Well, if you look at, and sorry, I didn't want to cut you short. If you look at anything, I mean, rewind 20 years, even using currency, using Interac or payments, or it wasn't as common. Today, I don't think I've had cash on me in 5 years.
Yeah.
Everything's digital. It's in the air, right? I think your pictures on your phone. How many of you print out your pictures? I mean, you'll have a couple, but I have thousands of pictures of the family and whatever. But it's all on my phone. Like, the one thing that I can't live without, which is unfortunate, is my phone. So my wife doesn't like that so much. But I don't think I've turned off my phone since 2003. So, it's always on and always going. So it's just it's coming.
Yeah.
You don't really physically need anything. I don't need a passport. I don't need a driver's license. I don't need it, even a debit card. You can tap with your phone. So that's what I meant by it's a, yeah.
Michael, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here, and I've seen some familiar faces and new faces, so I love speaking at events like this. When we were talking about the title of the panel, and I was reflecting on what trust means. So if you think about an engagement, we think about a digital ID or a credential you might already have, like a driver's license. There's a reason that these documents exist, right? A driver's license is a permit to drive. It asserts that you've passed the test of the jurisdiction. It says you're a competent driver. Maybe there's conditions on there. You need corrective lenses. There might be other attestations on there. This person's an organ donor. But when we talk about digital ID, trust in that context is, well, who issued the driver's license? Who did they issue it to? Is the document been modified? Is it a fake driver's license? Is the information on there, is it accurate, right? So when they issued the document, did they sit down and say, well, let's look at a bunch of correlations of the data you have, your birth certificate, let's take a look at your proof of address, like a utility bill. It all matches up. I'm going to issue this license. The second part of trust is when you present that, right? Are you sure that the person or the entity you're presenting the driver's license to, are they going to copy your information down? So if you go to the bar and they say, I need to know you're over 19 or 21 or 18, are they then, zipping your license through it, capturing your all your personal information? And I think for certain people, this might be a lot more relevant because a bouncer or somebody might want to follow you home or know where you live, that this is a real issue. So is it trust in the verifier? That's important. And then the third piece is the holder of it. Is that document going to degrade over time? Can it be modified once I give it to the person? And that will be trust in the holder. And when we're talking about trust with digital ID, we need to think about all aspects of these trust. In the Canadian context, that's a really, I'm going to say, wicked problem, because we don't have an issuer of these documents, or driver's licenses is an example. We've got 13 or 14 different government jurisdictions that issue important documents. We've got private sector organizations like utilities that issue important documentation. We've got professional bodies like the colleges of physicians and surgeons, or professional engineers that issue certifications. And all of this needs to get stitched together at one point or another along in the ecosystem. And so we need to think about a lot of really difficult issues. How do I know that the issuer of this ID was authorized to issue it? Who is that organization? Is it the Blockbuster membership card, or is it I had a jumbo video card, right? Like, these things are kinds of documents that people use in the economy and in the ecosystem all day, every day. And I don't think we question, sometimes why these certificates exist, or what was the policy problem we were trying to solve at the time 40 years ago or 80 years ago. And what we're running into now is, how do we build engagement onto digitizing? Back to the earlier point, we're on a continuum of evolution here in digitizing the economy. How do we open up those problems and really have the discussion about, why do we issue that certificate in the first place? Does it need to be the way it is? How do we add digital security features on top of it? All with the goal of improving trust in the overall ecosystem. The last thing I think about here is that, Canada, just in digital ID, Canada doesn't have a national ID card, right? In fact, you could argue there aren't many identity cards at all. a passport is a travel document, right? It has identifying information on it, but it's not the purpose of the document in the first place. So you're seeing us being very intentional now in the digital ID community, really rethinking about how we communicate the topic here, just because it's not only about proof of personhood or proof of legal identity, but it can also be about all the other kinds of proofs I mentioned. A, I'm a registered business, or B, I'm a professional engineer. Like, all of these claims need to be proved digitally, and it's going to be a long, interesting journey. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, really sets out the scale, I think, of the challenge there. As you say, trust on so many levels in the kind of documents that are used to verify, the verifiers, the people that hold those documents. Interesting what you say about the federal structure being a challenge here. It'd be interesting to hear if that's a similar challenge in Germany, although you do have a national scheme in place, which you don't have in Canada. So I think just all of you, I think, have set out how there are huge benefits of doing this, but real challenges in terms of how we might achieve it. I've just had a note just to say some people are listening on the simultaneous translation, and we're all speaking a bit fast. So we will slow down a little bit in terms of, we're just so enthusiastic about digital IDs that we're going fast. I think before we go to questions from the audience, I've got a very simple question to put to all of you on this issue of trust. Do you think that citizens are justified in their kind of cynicism or their lack of trust, both in the security of a system, a digital ID system, but also in the way that it might be used by the government? So are they justified in their caution and resistance to this? Magdalena, I'm going to come to you first.
Simple question. Sure. It's almost a philosophical or an ethical question, right? But I think working and operating in Germany, yes, they're justified. Like, there should always be a healthy level of kind of vigilance, and that doesn't mean that the government in Germany today is doing anything sinister, but only by kind of upholding certain thresholds and upholding certain barriers can we guarantee that this is not going to slip, right? And I think in terms of changing generations, if you look at historical kind of learning patterns in society, the further back the event is from yourself, the less likely you'll be to actually understand why it's important that stuff not be seamless, for example. Because of course I have an expectation of stuff being seamless, but there's some great content on kind of designing for friction from the digital design community, which I would highly recommend to anyone interested in this. So kind of thinking from a designer's point of view, seamlessness is the goal, but how do I make sure that at very critical points people stay active in a way, right? So it's kind of like, I've obviously not been active enough with my back because it's now bad. It's kind of similar like that, right? You need to exercise this muscle of conscious interaction with anyone really, but the state especially, to prevent us running into the same.
So you were saying in your opening remarks, for example, that you know that if you roll out new technology in Germany, you'll have a group of people straight away trying to prove that technology is not robust. So you would see that as quite a helpful thing.
Yes, and that goes back to my point about user testing being unpleasant. Obviously, that's also unpleasant. We're often at the receiving end of criticism from kind of the sector. But that's fine. Like it comes with the job, and I think it's a healthy criticism if it's voiced in a constructive way. We can discuss that, but it's still like just the fact that they're there, and these are like some extremely smart, extremely technologically savvy people who obviously we need on our side. And I think you could argue. Sorry, I'm speaking too fast. You could argue, shouldn't they be working inside the government? How do we get these people inside? And I think there's I don't know if there's a right answer to that, but we've been thinking a lot about incentive structures in our work recently, because mainly in terms of funding and kind of motivating people to go on leaps of faith. But I think this also applies to this kind of work, right? What are the incentives for people once it's their own project? And I know there's like concepts of white hat hackers in the private sector, so I'll be happy to discuss if any of you have good experiences with that. But for us, this relationship with people who are non-government actors is actually quite beneficial.
Great, thanks. Sorry, say that again, John?
I said without challenge, there's no progress, right?
Exactly.
So having them work within a government or any organization, I don't know if that would be beneficial. I mean, inherently, anything comes out, somebody's going to try and break it, right? And I made a very good living over the last decade on cyber, right? So it's just, and it's an interesting industry. I think you have to put it in the context of what value is the information that can be accessed by these groups or individuals, and you know, so it's very important, obviously, for your own personal identity and your information, but there's usually a motive behind it. There's an end goal, and it's usually financial, right? So you got to start. I think everyone has to start getting in the mindset of is my information and my social insurance number and my picture really that valuable to specific? For some people, it is 100%. I think, but generally speaking, it would be, you know, a large project like a digital ID. Absolutely, that's going to be one of the big priorities for a nation state that will come in to try and do something with it. But I think you have to have the challenges outside. Somebody has to break it, right? So because that's how industry learns as well, right? So and governments on how we make things better, and it's a constant fight. It's a constant evolution of technology. I'll go back into like the disruptive technology, right? So there's only disruptive technology when there's problems that can be fixed, right? So we look at it that way. I wanted to ask you, you don't still have your Blockbuster card, do you?
I kept it just in case.
Okay, I'm like Blockbuster. But there's a good one. That's a great example about not being able to see ahead and what's coming down the road. Blockbuster is the best example of that, right? So, yeah.
Michael, your thoughts on, are people justified in being resistant to this?
So I think about this in a couple different ways. So it is absolutely essential that we have challenge functions to the way we do things, right? There's a reason that Parliament's got an oppositional structure by nature, right? It's how we best reach the truth. And law works the same way. Court systems are adversarial. We absolutely need to have the right hard questions asked here. And how we build the system, transparency needs to be at the center. This is a tenet of open government, and you know, we can add open source, open science, open everything here is the only way we're going to reach and have trust in the systems that are being built. I thought of a recent example where, and apologies to the people that are fans of cryptocurrency, but the crypto bros were saying, hey, we've developed a whole new encryption scheme. It's going to change the world, guys. You know, when you look at, has anybody actually red teamed the cryptography involved in that coin? Has anybody actually sat down and done the math and said, hey, how secure is that function? That is essential here. And what we're kind of, when we talk about smart contracts and all these technologies, we're essentially saying we want to replace the time-tested legalese, which is a language, right? The legal wording and the precedent with app code, right? And I'm not a lawyer, but I can read legalese, I can kind of understand it. But I happen to be a programmer, and when I read some of this code, I have a hard time, right? And I'm a literal expert. I have a hard time understanding what's happening in some of these systems. And I think we need to be really intentional when we replace well-used and well-understood systems with novel systems. We need to be really careful how we do that, especially as I'm a public servant. You know, as governments replace these things, we have an utmost responsibility, really, to ensure that this is done with the public trust in mind. So yes, I do think it's warranted and it's essential.
Thanks, Michael. Questions from the audience. Oh, we've got lots. Hold on. I'm going to come to people that haven't spoken first. And then, so we've got right at the front here, and then a lady here. And we will get lots more questions in because we do have a bit more time. So.
Thank you. Stelios from Cyprus. Well, a comment on trust. I think trust is to be gained, is not to be taken for granted. So, especially for government systems, when we put out a system or anything out there, then it is to be tested very, very critically by people. So we need to make sure first that we put out something that is robust, because if someone manages to break into it, then we pretty much lost the game, because it is very, very difficult to overcome that later on. So we need to be very, very mindful when putting out a system there. It has to be tested thoroughly, designed properly, and so on and so forth. And then there is an awareness issue that we need to tackle. We need to raise awareness. We need to make sure that our product is good, what we are putting out there, and we need to communicate to the public what it does. Transparency is very important, and we need to comfort people that they can trust our technology, our systems. So that is what I think we need to do.
Thanks, Doris. And we're going to hear from you on one of our panels later, so we can pick you up on how well you're doing on all of that insight
Can I make a
as
comment
well.
on that?
Yeah, sure.
It's a very good point. Inherently, anything will be broken. There will be a breach anywhere. So there's also something called inherent trust. So I'm sure most of you, I mean, I'll date myself, like you have a Facebook account or an Instagram account. They've been hacked dozens of times, but you still use them and you still trust them. I think it's, to your point, is transparency. I think you have to be transparent about it and to gain the trust, but inevitably there will be a breach. The question is, do you have the technology in place and the partnerships in place between government and industry to remedy that, identify it quickly, limit the amount of exposure or information that's out there? It's going to happen. There's not one industry on this planet that hasn't been hacked, right? Or from a government or from anything, any account. So I think it's definitely not an if. It's just when and then how they're going to.
People are far less forgiving of government mistakes than they are of mistakes
for sure.
on Facebook.
Yeah.
Question down here.
Sure. So I'm going to flip this whole conversation on its head. I'm going to give the other side of the equation. So I'm Crystal Sewards. I manage the Office of the Chief Data Officer at StatCan. But I'm also a citizen. And I want digital services. I will be one cranky little old lady. I want digital. So I'm just going to give you an example. A few years ago, my stepfather passed away. And when I went to the funeral home with my mom, we were given 20 death certificates. Why did I need 20 paper copies? My mom, in her time of need, had to do a whole lot of horrible things again and again and again. So I know we need trust. I know we need transparency. I know we need security. But are we too conservative? Do we not do enough? What about the rest of our citizens who want digital services, who are ready for them? Do we just push them aside and say, hey, we got a percentage of people that don't like it, so we're not going to do it. We're going to take it really, really slow. So that's my only challenge, is how do we do better for our citizens who want digital services and want them now? So that would be my question.
Thank you. Really interesting question. And I think maybe to Magdalena and to Michael on this one, because it's about, do we even know the sense of percentages, who's for, who's against? Do we have that information?
Yeah, so actually I mentioned that the digital service is quite a new unit in Germany. So this responsibility has been interspersed in different levels of government. It's still very interspersed, but we are kind of the attempt at having a digital service in Germany. I'm going to leave it at that. And so we came with a new kind of perspective, I would say, or we came with a built-in naivete that allowed us to do some things that other people kind of are maybe not doing. So, for example, do large-scale user research on things that have been around for 10 years, because most government units would say, well, we already have this, we don't need to be doing user research. So, to your question, yes, we did do that in last year for the EID system in Germany, and we did a large qualitative piece with some explorative research and a lot of interviews. And we also did a quantitative piece on, so like a representative study. And what you see is that there are different groups, right? So you have different segments in society. Absolutely, to your point, there will be, actually the wide majority of people will say, listen, I don't care, just give me the service, I need the service. And I think and I absolutely agree with you, I hope it didn't come across as let's not do digital ID. I think that the risk of doing things quickly and out of a certain kind of agitation is that then maybe these systems will be, for example, hacked very, very quickly, and then you kind of lose all that effort. And that's the reason we have our head of people likes to say, if something needs to happen fast, do it slowly, or if something needs to happen quickly. Because it's, you just need to be careful. I'm not saying let's take another 10 years, absolutely not. I think what we've seen is that we just need to pay attention to users more, and then start iterating and getting out improvements quickly where we can do them quickly. And so to those people, I would say, and we've seen that in Germany, it follows a kind of technology adoption curve. We're quite a large market, so maybe naturally these 80 million people follow a market adoption curve, and we have about these 10% of people who are using digital ID, and then we have at the back end kind of maybe something around 15–20% of people who are very mistrustful. And so our challenge now is how to move digital ID from this early adopter segment into the mainstream. And that's what we're working on, and we're starting very small. So we started with the letter that you get when you receive your ID card, which kind of explains the system to you. And that really didn't feel very spectacular, but it's the entry point to this entire journey and this entire world. So I get what you're saying about wanting services fast, and maybe each government also has a different answer to that. With the situation in Germany, with the very critical third sector, with our history, maybe we need to take it a bit slower, period.
Thanks. Michael, your thoughts as well on that?
Yeah, hi, Crystal. We used to work together, so. It's a great question, right? So digital services are an evolution, right? There's no point here where we're going to go like this and say, hey, we're done, we figured out digital ID, or hey, we figured out digital services. This is going to be a constant series of change. And this is one thing that I think I'm a government person, but the one thing that I think the system hasn't yet figured out is that software is meant to change, right? And I can't sit down and write a budget proposal and tell you down to the dollar 5 years out what this system's going to cost me to build, operate, maintain. What we really need is the capability to evolve and change constantly. And what we're really struggling with here is that we've got this big legacy of systems, right? They're old, they're on mainframes, they're rusted out, but they form the backbone of our social safety net and of a lot of what we do as, throughout the course of our lives. How do we intentionally innovate and evolve these things? Because we can't do a clean sheet design and say, file new country and say we're going to be a digital country. We've got to really work with the systems we have and digitize them. So this is going to be a long-term effort by more than one level of government, and it's going to be a real challenge, I think, as a public sector to maintain momentum here and to really respond to events and citizen and people's needs as we move ahead. It's not an easy service design problem, but I think, if it helps, I think we don't notice all the improvements. Back to what Magdalena said, there's sometimes incrementalism isn't as noticed, right? So there's small improvements happening often, And we're going to wake up one day and not realize how far we've shifted. So keep that in mind.
Thanks.
And may I say one more thing, because I've just gathered my thoughts, is that what I'm advocating for is kind of before you decide that a system isn't working and you need to throw it away and build something new, as per Michael's point, take a careful look at what you have, because you might see that if you put 6 months into usability work, actually this system is going to then accelerate really quickly, and we will get to that single national ID benefit that you're all talking about. So just kind of a bit of mindfulness, I guess, and looking at things carefully.
Thanks. I know we had lots of other questions. I'm also conscious I haven't taken any questions from this side of the room, if anybody's got any questions here, but we had question here, Melvin, I think you want them, and then was there somebody right at the back there? Yep. And then we will come. So let's take two questions, and then we'll do another round very quickly before we go. So really keep your answers short, if that's okay. If you want to put your hand up at the back, so the mic comes to you. Thank Melvin, quickly for you.
This is about Ontology project in Germany. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it is the attempt to democratize this idea of trust. So Michael did a wonderful job describing the trust elements that are part of a Web 2 environment. Ontology in Germany is working with the Digital Identity Service to try and figure out how to do that in a Web 3 environment where we're democratizing trust in a way that it is not focused on a central authority or a set of central authorities in public service, but is a user experience where trust is shared with the user. Can you describe how that's working and how it changes the dynamic of the development of a digital identity?
Sure, let me take a stab at that. So I'm not familiar with the specifics of the project you've mentioned, but I know, so we do have some also EU-wide initiatives kind of piloting Web3 for self-sovereign identity, and also we had a project in Germany around that. And actually, it comes back to what I started with. I don't believe, the digital service doesn't believe that Web3 is where it should be right now, to be putting citizens' data onto it. It's just not tried and tested enough. There's no consensus on protocols, on standards, on security, and we've unfortunately seen some of that also kind of backfire in Germany. So while I see the potential of SSI and Web3 identity, it is not the urgent problem in Germany right now, because even though I said citizens should always have a healthy degree of mistrust, we do not have a problem with a lack of central authority. We have one that's actually pretty trusted right now. So let's work on delivering services first and building a smooth digital identity experience on the infrastructure we have that's been tried and tested for 10 years. And in parallel, there are some kind of more sandboxed research projects going on, seeing, okay, what can we actually make out of this new technology and how can it help us?
Thanks. There was a question at the back. Thanks.
Hi. My question is sort of more related to engagement. It's about, creating a digital identity and trying to ensure that we have access to it. Do any of you have thoughts on how those with lower incomes could even access the system? They don't necessarily have phones, they have phones, but they don't have, they don't pay for mobile data. Yeah. And then you run into situations where, I don't know if anyone else remembers, but the Rogers network went down for a number of days. How does that then, it doesn't delete your identity, but you can't access your identity for a period of time. So
yeah. So I think this is a really interesting question, digital IDs, but as we just increasingly digitalize all our services, are we going to have a kind of digitally excluded group that we are creating, not just necessarily low income, but maybe elderly people, other people that just don't interact with digital services in the same way. So really important for inclusion and equality. Michael, your thoughts on that?
I mean, this is an essential question, right? So, couple thoughts. Digital doesn't only mean on your smartphone, right? It can mean a lot of things. It can mean smart paper. It can mean, I don't like bringing up the proof of vaccination, but there was QR codes there. That's digital information embedded in a physical context. If you think about your debit card or your credit card, right, there's a chip on there, all the information is contained in it. And when you tap that, that's a multi-factor authentication, by the way. It's something you have, and it's something you know, your PIN, if you're asked to type it in. So there's a lot of ways that we can make sure that the form factor of digital credentials and all these documents aren't exclusively on the latest and greatest equipment. The other thing there is that we need to bring everybody along here at some level. And doing things digital doesn't mean you turn off the in-person or physical channels. We need to maintain those. And like I was talking this morning with a colleague, I think a lot about how do we maintain that service channel and not have the digital channel be better in some kind of way and that it more advantageous? How do we make sure we're still improving the physical channels? And just one quick thought there might be is if we're actually reducing friction or improving the user experience here, we'll have more time to use and spend with people on the other channels and more space with the legacy systems being less broken. But yeah, so it's definitely a concern and it's something we think about a lot.
Thanks. John, is this the issue of inclusion and not having a digitally excluded kind of group something that you guys are concerned about as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael touched on it. I think it's got to be progressive, and it's always evolving, and you have to offer the services to those, let's say, that don't have the technology, right? So I'll go back to, it's like banking, right? So when I was a kid, if you wanted to go get money from the bank, you had to go to the bank. So it's that service. You can still do that today, but you have other services that have been layered over top for ease of use, the tap, for example, right? Or so I think it's got to always be inclusive, but I think it's just progressive. And over time, I was just sitting here thinking before, I mean, in 20 years from now, this is going to be a relevant topic, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So when my son is in his mid-30s, this won't. I would assume there's going to be other issues, a lot of other issues for sure. This just probably won't be one of them, right? So there's no. I think one of the big things to take away is there's no finish line. It's always, you're always improving, improving. You're trying to improve and offer different services and go towards potentially this, digital ID. But like I said, I think what's in place today will remain for the next 50 to 100 years. Who knows? But there's going to be layers of additional services on top. That answers the question. Yeah.
Magdalena, I'm going to give you the final thoughts on this before lunch. The issue of digital IDs and inclusion.
Yeah. Sure. So I think stepping back into my point about user centricity and market segmentations, what thorough understanding of your users allows you to do is to look at their not individual as in per person, but their needs in terms of like different cohorts. And so this is the shift from normative thinking into user-centric thinking. In normative thinking, you say there's one law, this regulation needs to work for everyone in this country. Digital service delivery, you can actually work with the beautiful benefits of software to customize it to different groups. And so we have been exploring that in our tax, for example, in some tax services, so building a tax declaration service specifically for pensioners because they have a very different mental model and kind of mindset around digital. But I think there's one thing that we haven't managed to kind of figure out yet in terms of our national ID scheme is that it is a limited group of people who gets these IDs. And so visitors to Germany, people who are not permanent residents, who are not EU citizens or German citizens, they don't get one of these cards. And so this system is currently excluding them. Do we think building on the system for now to do better in digital service delivery is worth it? We do, but we are keeping this in mind and are mindful that there need to be fallback options. Like Michael, like you said, it doesn't mean turning off offline or in person. It means giving people in the local office, government office, the time and the peace of mind to deal with people who do not fit into the other kind of segments.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. I can't believe how quickly that discussion went, but we have come to the end of our time.